Hey there, my name is Chris Behling with 10 Pound Gorilla, and today we're going to be doing a quick overview on Postman. Postman at a high level is an API tool that allows you to play around with APIs when you're working with a library of APIs that you might be receiving from some developers or with a product that you're looking to do some integrations with. Leveraging Postman allows you to really explore how data is being sent to you when you're accessing that API, and then how to also send data back to it. So Postman was, I think, first launched, the initial version was in 2012, and it's a pretty great product. You can download it as a application that you would install on your computer, but Postman also supports a web-based client where you can go to Postman, sign in, and start to work through that dashboard. It looks just like this when you download the application, so you can use it in both contexts, whatever is convenient for you. At a very high level for Postman, like an organization perspective, they have what they call workspaces. And so that might be something like a company that you are doing work for. So we might have a 10 Pound Gorilla workspace where if we developed APIs for something internal that we're using, right, we might have a workspace for that. If we are doing development for clients, they may set up Postman projects where all of their APIs are cataloged in there, and we can use that and access it to work with that data. Workspaces can have people invited into them, but then within your workspace, you would create collections, which are just kind of like micro projects or subcategorized projects. And then within that collection, you can create all of these different API calls where you can start to work with some of that data. So I have this example collection here, which is this Too Sexy QR code app, and I have some API requests that we can make and play around with. Quick overview on this Too Sexy QR code app. This is on our staging site in DNN for Less. Pretty basic kind of app that's being built, but it is essentially allowing users to create an account and create QR codes where they fill out an internal title, a URL that they want to send someone to, and then UTM, campaign source, and medium that they can include into that URL so they can do campaign tracking. Not very pretty by any means, but it is. This app is leveraging the Too Sexy APIs when we are creating codes, editing them, or deleting them. It is not going through the typical Too Sexy editor interface where it has that pop-up and it has what you would expect from Too Sexy. If we go into the admin section for this app and we look at our data, there's only one content type, and it's just codes. And then in there, I have 6 fields, which is our internal title, our code link, code hits, which is intended to be like your page views or the number of times that code has been scanned, and then your UTM, campaign source, and medium. And the main purpose I think this tool would be providing outside of just generating a one-off QR code is once you generate a QR code and you get it printed, it's stuck and it can't be updated. And so if you generate a QR code or a YouTube video and you print that on a shirt and you scan that and you change that, or that YouTube video gets removed, that QR code is going to be broken. So you may need to update that link over time. And so the way this is built is it has a reference ID for this QR code, and it always takes you back to this website. It identifies the ID for this QR code, and then it finds the URL for it, and then it will redirect you out. So you can change this URL over time without needing to get a new QR code. It's always going to be that same QR. If I jump back into the admin side here, we can see that there's a couple codes that we have created here. So there's 5 entries in total. And then to work with these in Postman, we'll need to access the APIs, and that's something you can get into this REST API control. Within the call virtual REST URLs, Too Sexy is going to output what are the different methods for the data that you can access and how you can, what type of data you can get. So we can see that there's a get all codes, read one specific code. There's a process to create a new code, update a code, or delete them. Because I'm working through this with Postman, it's going to be an external call, so I would need to change my kind of my scope or the scenario to be a fully qualified URL so we can access that. So same kind of idea, same kind of endpoint of getting to the code and accessing that data. I can click within the accordion to review an example request to it using some jQuery or JavaScript. And if we look at creating a record, we can see the kind of format that you would use to attach different key value pairs in your payload to send over new data. And then working with these APIs, they're pretty restrictive by default, so you need to open up access to those APIs. And if we click on the user icon, it's going to take you to permissions, and you'll need to set a security role for who can add, update, delete records through the API. This app that I have set up is pretty much wide open, so anyone that has access to that API can go in and create codes. If this was going to become something production ready, you'd want to lock that down quite a bit. So looking at those APIs and jumping over to Postman, we can see the different requests that I have here. I have get codes, which has this URL for requesting all of the codes that have been created in the application. I don't need to pass through any body or any object or any additional data to make this request, so I can just click send. It's going to go in, access the data, and then output this in JSON format for us. This is the same format that 2Sexy is really kind of outputting it for you when you're accessing it through the Razor templates. You can access it by the name of that property and output the value for it. So in this case, we're just getting every record in this app. And then if we go to the next instance, we are accessing a specific code. So if I go in and grab this code ID of 2510, and we add this to the end of our URL, mirroring the structure that 2Sexy is outlining here for us, we're then able to access an individual record. And so this would be something that you would access if you're doing an edit mode where you need to pull up and open a modal. You're accessing that individual record, then you're able to get that data and plot it into your UI. Still no additional data being required to make a request, but in some instances you could pass through some APIs will have you pass through a payload, and that will allow you to request some like additional information. And looking at the next item here, we have creating a code in this instance. So to build this, I just basically copied the response that 2Sexy was returning for me, and I was able to paste this in. It's following the same structure that 2Sexy is outlining here for creating a record. Just in this case, this is just it implemented in JavaScript instead of JSON format. So I updated this. I did change the order that the API is outputting them, and just to have a format that kind of mirrors the structure that I'm used to working in. When a user is adding or editing a code to the UI, the first thing they define is their title, the URL, then they do like campaign source and medium. So the order is irrelevant essentially. So I have this defined as the payload doing it in a raw JSON format. You can also submit data to APIs in different format. You could do form data or www form URL encoded, depending on any requirements that API might have. So in this case, we're just passing this over as raw JSON data. And so if I just put in a note here, we'll do test code via Postman, and we'll do it's 3:13 p.m. And then we'll save and submit. It's going to go through, create the code for us, and then it's going to return that object for us. And so maybe in this app, which it's not doing currently, after we create the code, we close the modal, and then we build the new code for the user in the UI without necessarily reloading the page. Currently, it just goes through and reloads the page, but that's something you could do. If we clicked on our codes itself, we can now see that that code has been created. It's showing up in the data and would be accessible to anything within the app that's using that information. I can go back to get codes, request it, and we should see that new record in here. And then this update script or API, same kind of idea. We're passing through the code ID that we want to do an update for, and then we're able to selectively choose which parameters we want to do updates for. So maybe we only care about updating the link or the title, and so we can change this to be 3:14 p.m. And we're going to do Postman equals true. Then we'll go ahead, save. I should get rid of that extra trailing comma, and then submit. And so now we've updated this API, so we can see how that structure's making those changes for us. So if we go back into our entries, we can see that the URL has changed, our time has changed, the title of it has changed. And then TrueSexy also has the support to do a delete method. So we just have a method here for delete. We can pass through the entity ID that we want to go through and delete and hit that request to remove it as well. So I could grab that ID, paste it in, and now that record should be removed from the site. This example is really looking at a super basic API because there is no authentication required to access this API. When you're working with any production-ready API, there's going to be some kind of authentication that you'll need to do to validate who you are and what data you should be able to access. And so an example might be something like Paymo. Paymo has an API, super easy to get started and working with. And so they have a GitHub repo where they kind of manage their documentation on it. But their starting point here is describing how you make requests to the API. They output their endpoint for it, or the URL, and then the expected authentication parameter is using this user email address and password, which is the email address and password you use to log into Paymo. And then you can access this API. If we're going to access clients, in this case, it'll output all of our clients for us. And so I have an example, I think here, if I go back to Paymo, I have a demo Paymo get request for projects. In the authorization tab, where we might include like our body, we can update our authorization. And in this case, Paymo is expecting a username and password. So this is a basic authentication where we put in a username and password to access that data. Other common ones you'll see is like a basic auth token that you'll put in, but there's a large number of variations available. So we go to a basic auth. I could do something like my email address. And Postman has what they define as like secret keys, I believe, and you can then type that in with like a curly brace type naming convention, and it keeps your data secure, so it's not outputting what my I titled this Asana, but it's Paymo. Proper naming would be helpful. But if I go ahead and submit this, it's going to make a request, access all of the data that my user has access to in Paymo, and then start to output this information. And then we can go in and work with all of the data that Paymo has available to us. I'm sure Asana has an API that you could go in and request projects. We're doing something similar with Paymo currently, where when a new project gets created, we have a Zapier integration that receives some of that data, and then we parse it in Zapier and then send it off to another tool where we're managing that information. But you could do something like this with their APIs, building an event listener, and build a more integrated solution. Rambling a bit there, but yeah. So looking at some other APIs that you'll see, I had pulled up simple texting. This was something I think Gabe, you were working with a bit for Colorado Cross Country. We're using that to send out text messages to users and sign them up for the text message service. So they have same kind of documentation where we can look at how do we authenticate into the API. So they're using that authorization bearer token. You would generate your API in the simple texting platform, and then in Postman, you would be able to go in and set this as a bearer token, and then whatever your API key is that tool is generating, key that in, and then you can start to make requests against that API. If it is invalid, it will usually generate a error message for you and kind of give you a bit of information so you can go in and resolve any of those issues. Looking at like the contact section, again, we might do something like get a contact, or probably like get all contacts. They don't have, kind of looking for a lookup by an email address, but they might not have that. And I'm not prepared for that. But creating a contact, right? That's something that we could be doing easily enough. We can see the API method for that is API/contact. And then we can see the object or the data that we need to pass through to add that new contact. Same thing if we go in at like updating a contact, we can look at the endpoint for that API, and then again, the expected data for it. The bulk of the information in the middle here is going to give us some information like what is required, what do we need to send to go in and successfully update the data through the API. And then the last example I have here is Active Demand. This is a marketing tool like MailChimp, Constant Contact, SharpSpring. It's like a email marketing CRM type tool. But same idea. You can create contacts. You can look up contacts. If we look at this create contact, again, they're providing us the API endpoint to make the request and then showing us how they're formatting data. We can see an example request here. And in this case, they have this formatted in a JSON format that we can easily work with to submit this data. And I think if we go and look at the put to update a contact, this one is in a different format. This is a form submission type where it's not in a JSON format data. So working with this data, I would then need to and probably want to convert this to JSON to work with. And so you can take a look at their documentation, see how they're formatting the data, and then make modifications to it to fit your particular build out that you're doing. One of the things that I really like about Postman is the code snippets that it generates. Once you have an API working and doing what you expect it to, from getting records and updating records, you can click on the code icon on the right-hand side, and it's going to give you code snippets in your preferred language that you are coding in. So if we're doing React or Vue or something like that, we're using a JavaScript library to make these API calls and work with the data, this is going to give us that format right out of the gate and something that we can easily start to integrate into our project. We can also go in and do different requests if we're making like a curl request or whatever our specific languages that we're going to be coding in, we can get that code sample and start to integrate that into our project. So nice quick start, I think, on getting those code snippets. And then with Postman, kind of built on collaboration, you can share out collections with other people on your team, and they can work with that data and understand how to use it and integrate into their project. I did mention briefly about the tokens that you can generate. Those are all related to your user, so it creates security around it, so you're not typing in a password into the authorization, sharing out that API through Postman, and then people have access to that password. So that gets kept to your local environment, so it's safe and not throwing out data where it shouldn't be. So that's kind of the quick overview on Postman. I really enjoy using it to play around with APIs and just to get a good feel for how it works, get that model condensed down into what we need to do for the project that we're working on, and then we can take that code and start to integrate it into the project that we're working on. That's all I have. Any questions? We can cut it at any point.
How did you get turned on to Postman? I've never heard of it.
I think it was Mark. He sent me some Postman project for a DNN development that we were doing, and he said, here's the API, here's how you can access the data, and here's what it looks like, and then you can easily start to interpret the data from it instead of like accessing it through your browser. Trying to make that request can become tedious. I think if you were to do it in code, you're then putting it in your code, making a request, loading the page, and kind of like going through this process that becomes a little bit difficult. So this helps isolate what you're doing. Just focus on the API, get it doing what you want it to do, and then whatever solution you're coating it into, just start to fold it in.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our Gorilla Learning Lab. We have a lot more banana tidbits for you to get ape over. Check out our other videos or visit our website at www.10poundgorilla.com. I'm swinging on out of here.
Ooh, ooh, ah, ah. Ooh, ooh, ooh. You're not subscribed? That's bananas!